Hi, welcome to step 3 in our Blaster game tutorial. So in step 2, we created 3 spaceships in Blender. And in this step, we're going to take those spaceships, make some slight modifications to them, bring them into our Unity game, and integrate them in and replace our boring old little cubes with these real spaceships. I also realized that I hadn't made a blaster to replace our little yellow cube, so I made one of those. Another thing that I'd like to mention is that as I was going through this, just to let you know that it takes a lot of trial and error to get these game components to work. When I put together these videos, I pretty much make sure everything's working first, just so it can go a lot faster, but it can take quite a bit of time and debugging to figure everything out and get everything working. So just to let you know, if you're a little frustrated putting your game together and it takes quite a bit of time and nothing seems to work right the first time, that's pretty typical. Usually when I try something the first time, it doesn't work either. So hang in there and keep working at it, and hopefully results will be enjoyable enough to keep you from giving up, and keep watching these videos for some helpful hints, and hopefully this can help you along your way. So let's put our game coding glasses on and get going. All right, so if you remember where we left off on step 2 was that we had created our 3 spaceships in Blender, and this is our large spaceship. Like I said in the intro, I also created a blaster here. So basically what this is going to do is replace our little yellow cube. Just made it purple. Could have been any color we want, but I generally try to keep them pretty basic colors. Not the greatest, but it will do for an example in our game. So the other thing I did was I adjusted the relative size of our ships. So what I'm doing is I can just hide and show our ships. So each one of these squares is a meter, and each one of our little blue squares, if you remember on our grid, was a meter size. That's why we made the blue grid, so we could get relative sizes measured correctly. So I have my large ship. If I show my medium ship, you'll see it is a bit smaller, and then my small ship. My small ship and my medium ship are kind of the same sizes. When I made this small ship smaller than this, it really got too small to see clearly in our game. So there's a lot of details in getting all your game components to look good together, which can take a lot of time. I didn't spend a huge amount of time. The purpose in this is just to kind of see how you can make components in Blender and bring them into a game in Unity. The other thing I had to do is adjust the center point of my object. So if we open our large ship, we hit, let's turn our screencast keys on before I forget. We hit N to bring that out, turn that guy on. All right, hit N again to close them up. So if we hit 3 to see a side view, what I've done is I moved my ship just above the plane. And if we go and into wireframe view, what we can see is that when we select this, there's this yellow dot here. The yellow dot, and what I did is normally the yellow dot would be right in the middle of the ship. So if I select the ship, go to Object, Set Origin, which is how we change the origin, and we say Origin to Geometry, it put the origin, that little yellow dot is appearing right in the middle of my object. But really what I want is it right below the object, because I want each of our ships to kind of look like they're floating above our plane. So when I set the Y value in Unity to 0, I want the ship to be just floating above the plane. It'll make it a lot easier to place our ships where we want to if we set that origin correctly. So let's go back up to Object, Set Origin, Origin to 3D Cursor. You can see our 3D cursor is right at 0, 0, 0. So now our origin's right below there. And if we go and look at each one of my ships, I've done that for each one of the ships. You see the origins down there. If we hide that guy, click on him. You can see our small ship also has the origin down there. So the ships are set up. Let's go back to solid mode. Let's unhide our large ship. So what we're going to want to do is, why am I having a hard time clicking on that guy? All right, so we got our large ship. What we want to do is we want to export it to the correct spot in our Unity game. So we're going to come in here. We're going to click on imports. We're going to right click, show an explorer. Drag him on the screen like that. Double click on imports. What I'm going to do is I'm going to copy this. I always like to copy and paste, saves a lot of typing. I'm going to copy this path, and then when we do export, we want to do export FBX. We want to just export the selected objects. We want to apply transform. I went through all this kind of basic steps in some of my earlier tutorials. If this goes a bit too fast for you, I'm selecting this. I'm going to paste in that path. So now it's going to be saved right into our imports folder path. We're going to call it large ship export. Let's hide that guy. Let's look at our medium ship. Select him. Export FBX. Call it medium ship. Do the same thing for our small ship. Export. All right, now we have to export our blaster. We already have something called blaster, so I'm gonna name this guy something a little different. Let's export. Let's call him blaster import. Sure, I have that there. Okay. All right. Let's go back to Unity. You can see we have all of our elements. What we're going to do next is we're going to grab our low poly palette and replace the material that it was exported in. If you remember, this makes it so we don't have copies of all kinds of imported materials, makes things a little cleaner. Apply that guy, small ship. Apply that guy. All right. So what we're going to do is we're going to come over here, create empty, import ships. We can name whatever we want, but we're going to drag these guys on here. Get instances of them into our scene. And if we look at our spaceships, our default spaceships, we actually had to set up a couple things. We have box colliders on each one, we have a rigid body on each one, and we have a script, because the script needs to hold the speed and the points for each one of our ships. So we need to do that for each one of these guys. So one thing to remember when you create these empty or any object on, it creates a default position. Not sure where it comes from, but all the objects inside of that are going to be relative to that. So we really want this to be at 0, 0, 0. All right, that's correct. What we're going to do is we're going to add a component to each one of these. We're going to add a box collider. We're going to add a rigid body. And we are going to shut off gravity because we don't want friction to come into play. If you remember when we were playing around with the physics engine in one of my previous tutorials, and we want to add in that spaceship controller script. And this is our large ship, so we're going to want it to be 10, which is the slowest, and we'll add 10 points to that. All right. So we're going to have to do that to each one of these other ships. Box glider, rigid body, turn off gravity, script, spaceship controller. We're going to give this guy a speed of 20 since it's our medium. It's going to be a little faster and a few more points. Go over to my small ship, same thing. Rigid body. All right. Turn off gravity. Add our script. Spaceship controller. All right. Now we can go to our spaceship launcher, and you'll notice that we have no game objects for our ships. So we're going to drag these guys over there. If you remember, we have a list of ships that our script uses for launching the ships, and it needs an instance of a ship to launch. All right, so that's set up. We have 45 ships per minute like we left in our last tutorial. So that should work. We have to replace our controller. So we're going to grab our blaster import and drag it onto our controller. All right. Let's see if that will work. Oops, we forgot to hide our other ships. They're going to be sitting in the middle here, which we didn't want. That's why that one kind of went floating up. Right, we have our blaster there. We have ships kind of floating all over the place. So let's go here. Let's undo this guy. Let's try that again, see if it runs any better. Remember, a lot of these things takes a bit of trial and error here. All right. So remember, they don't have any gravity, and we're just letting the normal old system take over. Actually, it looks like they are falling down here. Let's go to our missile mesh. We're going to turn that guy off. Got a little ahead of myself. Let's see. See, those guys are not moving. The small guys aren't moving. Let's check that out. So we have a box glider, we have a rigid body, no use gravity. Looks like the mass is correct. Oop, their speed is 0. We've got to set our speed for our small spaceship. So that's why it wasn't moving, because the script, if you remember, reads the speed from the ship. So that's the way you can have one controller send the ships at different speeds, because the speed defines its ship speed. The ship defines its own speed, and the ship controller that launches it uses that in order to... All right, so now the old physics engine's just kind of they're just kind of getting shoved around, as you can see. Nothing too interesting. They're kind of floating off into space. So we really don't want to do that. What we want to do is give it a better action. So what I want is the spaceship to, when it gets hit, to kind of flip up and around. So let's see what we need to do in order to make that happen. So let's go to our code. And what I did is I added some extra code on this on trigger enter. So normally, if we just have the physics collision box colliders take over, every time something would hit, it would come into on collision enter. But what I do is I want to turn that off, and I want to do my own little action when things collide, because I want the ship to kind of flip up and over and then land back on the ground. So what I did is I added this on trigger enter. And if we go to our missile, what I did is we clicked this little on trigger on the box collider. And in each one of these ships, I select is trigger. And actually, I don't think it's needed on all the ships, but I'm going to do it. So now only every time a box collider collides, it will just call this on trigger and won't let the default physics engine take over, which is what I want. So every time it is going to collide and hit that is trigger, I'm going to get an on trigger enter. And this component that's passed in is going to be the thing it collided with, which is the ship. So what I'm going to want to do is I want to do a couple things to the ship. First of all, what I want to do is turn gravity back on. So the one thing to remember is that all these elements over here in the inspector I can access and read and change through my script code. So in this case, I'm going to this use gravity and I'm turning it back on because I don't want the ship to go flying off into space. I just want it to kind of flip over and land on the ground. So I turn use gravity back on. I'm going to stop the velocity because I don't want it if I don't do that and it gets hit, it will keep moving in that direction that it was moving. So I want to stop the velocity and I want to turn my trigger off. If I don't do this, remember the physics engine, the box collider won't collide with my plane, and I want it to land on the plane. I don't want it to sink all the way through the plane and just go flying off into space. So I need to turn my trigger back off so it will stop and land on the plane correctly. The last thing I'm going to do is I'm going to add this explosion force. So what this is going to do is add a force to my spaceship, like there was a little explosion below it. And there's a couple settings we have. We have the actual force, which in this case I've typed in 60. And again, it took a lot of trial and error to kind of figure out what I wanted to do in order to get it to look how I wanted to. We have the explode position. Where is it that the origin of the explosion is taking place? Closer to it, the more force I assume it gives to it. The next one is the explosion radius. How wide of a radius is my explosion going to affect? And then the one is the amount of upward modifier. So if I want it to fly up more versus side to side, I can put a bigger number in that, and one seemed to work well. And then what I do want to do is I want the force mode to be impulse, like it's just one force on it. I could have a continual, and then it would just be like a continuous force, and I would have to turn this force off. But in this case, an impulse is just going to be like one force, and then it's just going to let the physics engine take over. So that's what I'm going to do. So I turned all those triggers on, so it's going to hit this on trigger enter every time I collide. So let's go back here. Let's run it again. All right. All right, so it's stopped. It's flipping over kind of how I wanted to, so that's good, but they're going like way too high. In fact, I don't even know. Oh, there we are. They will eventually come down. I don't know how high they went off the top of that screen, but not really what I want. I want them to kind of flip up and around. Just kind of maybe go up a couple meters off of the surface. So there's a couple things I can do. I can lower the explosion force, or I can increase their mass. Because remember, the heavier they are, the more force it takes to flip them over. And when I was playing around with this, so let's try a mass of 10 to see what that does. Let's go into our ships. Let's increase their masses. All right. So now let's try this. Like I said, it takes quite a bit of trial and error. I already did a good amount of trial and error, but I want to show you a little bit of that. Well, they flipped up, but not the kind of action I wanted. They didn't flip up hardly at all. And I might be able to make the force stronger. Or what I can do is let's make the mass 5 and see what that looks like. All right, 5, 5, 5. Try that out. It's not bad. It's kind of like what I wanted. They fly a couple up, a couple meters off the ground. So you'll notice that no more ships are coming out. Remember when we talked about that the lane is only cleared when the ships exit off the left or the right? And since I hit one on each lane, all the lanes now are showing ships in them. So no, and they're not moving because the velocity is 0. Remember, and I can't add a ship to a lane if there's a ship slower than me. So it effectively is clogging all my lanes. So what I'd need to do is once the ship blows up, I would need to clear it out of the lane. But since the ship's just kind of laying there, it kind of is kind of clogging up the lane. So that's going to have to wait. All right, so we effectively brought our ships in. We brought our little blaster in. We added some explosive force to get a little better action on our ships. So for the next step in the next video, what we're going to do is add some nicer effects. So our missile still is just a little cube, a long cube. That doesn't look very great. And we don't have any little explosions or anything. So we'll add that and then maybe add a little bit more, try to figure out what to do with the ship. Once it blows up, we could just make it disappear. Maybe try to break it up into a bunch of pieces. There's a couple options. Make it dissolve away. Show it on fire. Something. There's lots of things we can do to make that a bit more interesting. Again, a lot of those things take quite a bit of time. I'll do some basic effects for the next one, and we'll go from there. So if you like this video, remember, give it a thumbs up and stay tuned for the next step 4 where we will add a little bit better effects.